Yeah. Chris Hartis, welcome to the Pirate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I've actually been looking forward to sitting down and chatting with you for a little bit.
Well, when I heard you were doing a podcast talking to pilots about flying, naturally I was like, I would love to be there.
Hell yeah.
Love to be there.
So why don't you start us off by telling what your qualifications are and what your background in aviation is?
Yeah, no, great question. So just starting with kind of where I'm at now. So I'm a commercial multi-pilot. I've got about 6,500 hours, most of that in Alaska. About probably 5,500 of that is here. And that's in a variety of different types of aircraft, anything from King Air 100s, 200s, all the way down to a simple Taylor craft or a Stinson, Super Cub, things like that. And I currently own an air taxi, a small Part 135 operation with some de Havilland Beavers, a Cessna 185, and a few Helio Couriers with a partner of mine. We operate that in the summertime in Southwest Alaska. And then I also run a fishing lodge as well that I own and operate with my wife, and we take people on fly fishing trips, and it's a kind of a fly-in, fly-out remote luxury lodge. And we've just kind of recently turned the shift from, really going after commercial aviation, like maybe one day going to like a larger wide body aircraft, to just staying in Alaska. And I'm looking forward to sharing that story, because when I first came to Alaska, that was kind of always my goal of, long term, I always wanted to fly a 747. That was my dream airplane, whether that was flying for Atlas or FedEx, which FedEx doesn't fly 747s, but just something big. And when I got to Alaska, I felt like my heart just caught on fire here. As odd as that might sound to people, I never really understood what was here until I got to experience it. And when I did get to experience it, I just said, I will never leave. I can't, I just can't leave. And a lot of people called me crazy. They're like, man, like, when are you going to get a real job? Like, when are you going to go to the airlines? When are you going to do this? And I just said, never, ever, ever. And I am so thankful for airline pilots. Please don't misunderstand me. Like, I am very thankful for those guys. They help us travel and stay connected and get where we need to go and get our mail and everything else. Like, they're very, very important, but I just don't feel like that was I don't feel like that kind of flying is what God instilled in me to be passionate about. Like, I'm just not passionate about that kind of flying. Just being in an airplane where I have to make so many decisions of my own, so many decisions that aren't just standardized in a procedural book, something that, is very much, I don't want to say flying the seat of your pants, but there's not necessarily like a procedure for every single scenario that you find yourself in. Oh. And, how to evaluate and use your judgment to operate safely. That is what I'm passionate about. And doing it in a way where you take care of people. Because those are my two biggest passions, are people and airplanes. And I just love that I get to combine that. Growing up, I grew up in Spokane, Washington, which is right there on the border of Idaho. And people ask me all the time just how I got into flying. And I was the chain link fence kid. I was the kid, like, hands in the chain link fence, looking at the airplanes. And I always wanted to go to this little cafe that was at the airport, because I could watch the airplanes take off and land, and I could care less about the food. It was just about the fact that I could see the planes. And my father at the time, he had a 140 when I was born, a Cessna 140. He was a private pilot, a couple hundred hours. And when I outgrew the car seat, my mom said, hey, we need to buy a bigger plane. So he bought a 170. And when we bought the 170, it flew for about a year, and then there were some issues with it. And we decided to do like some serious maintenance on it. And right when that happened, my dad got diabetes and unfortunately was not able to fly. And so the plane sat for a long time, I want to say it was about 15 just over 15 years. And if you know, and like any pilot knows, a plane sitting for that long is not good. So the plane sat there my whole life, and as much of a blessing as it is to own a plane, I had to sit there as a kid that wanted to fly and look at this plane just disintegrating in front of my eyes. And, you know, long story short, you know, my family didn't really have the means to fix it, to get it the parts that it needed. It needed a firewall paint job, it needed a new battery box, it just needed all kinds of stuff. We unfortunately left fuel in it for that amount of time, which was a huge mistake. So it needed a whole new fuel system, you know, clean everything out. It was kind of a disaster. And so my whole goal was to figure out a way to make enough money to fix that plane.
Really?
So I went to college in Spokane, in my hometown, at a place called Gonzaga University. A lot of people, if you like basketball, know Gonzaga for their basketball team. And I got a business degree from there. In my junior year, I got an internship at Boeing. I was just a strategy analyst there. I moved into Renton over on the west side of Washington, and Boeing pays their interns very well, like way more than I deserve for the work I was doing. I'm like, man, I feel like I'm just here learning and absorbing, and I'm getting paid, you know, $30 an hour to do that. It's crazy. And I lived with this wonderful family that the mother and father of a really good friend of mine from Gonzaga. They were very generous in letting me stay at their house for free. And the father was a retired Boeing manager who worked on the factory floor. And so I got to live for free, and I just saved every penny that I made. I mean, I probably saved 80 to 90% of my paycheck every month, and just bought like bare bones basic food. The family was very generous in how they fed me, and like I was just so well taken care of and so blessed with all the people that just kind of helped contribute to my path in getting here. And I got to finish that internship with a good pile of money, and I put it all into the airplane.
Yeah.
And when I left my internship, I asked my boss that gave me a conditional job offer. I said, what GPA do I need to graduate with for this job offer to stand? And he's like, just graduate. And I said, great. And so my whole senior year, I said, I am just doing what I need to do to graduate, and every other minute I am spending at the airport fixing the airplane with my dad. And so my dad and I put all that money into buying parts, the tools that we needed, and we fixed that whole thing top to bottom. I mean, we did, oh my gosh, rebuilding the magnetos, rebuilding the generator, the starter, inspecting the case, cleaning out the whole fuel system, redoing the gascolator, the fuel selector. Like everything was just total junk, gunked up. All the instruments, the firewall, we painted it inside and out. So we had to take the engine out. I mean, it was a huge deal, you know, for someone that had never done that.
Right.
And I got my license in that plane. And when I was first looking for an instructor, I said, I want an instructor that is going to really push me hard, because I wanted to be a good pilot. I could care less about just the thrill of flying. I said, I want to be the best pilot I could possibly be. And I was so thankful to have the instructor that I had. He went way above and beyond what you should expect from any kind of instructor. Like, he would show up early and do ground with me, and he wouldn't charge me for ground. He was also a mechanic, so he would help me fix little things on the plane. Like if something broke, he would help me fix it. And the kind of training that he did with me, you couldn't ask from anyone. Like our hypoxia training was, he said, okay, stay up all night. Do not allow yourself to go to sleep. We're meeting at 2 a.m. and we're going to do your night cross country at 2 a.m. at 10,000 feet. And he brought an oxygen bottle for himself. And he's like, you're going to experience true hypoxia, and I'm going to explain to you like how to get out, just so you could really feel it.
That's
right?
Awesome.
And he took me to like off airport strips, and mind you, we're not in Alaska, so that's very uncommon.
Right.
Like, off airport strips. He had all these incredible drills, and he grilled me pretty hard. in our training, it was perfect is the standard.
Nice.
And you're never going to be perfect, which is a great standard to have, because you're always going to be trying to achieve something. You're not just going to be satisfied with, well, you landed the plane, good job.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you landed the plane and yeah, it was smooth, but you were 50 feet long and your right tire was on the center line instead of neither tire being on the center line, being right in the middle of your plane. And that was the standard that, he held me to. And for that, I'm very grateful, because looking around at other students that I was friends with, they were soloing in 30 hours, 20 hours. And for me, it was also partly my dad's say as well, I didn't solo till I had 60 hours, which is, I was embarrassed to admit that for a long time, but looking back, my standard was I had to have so many perfect landings in a row. Perfect meaning smooth touchdown, on a spot, center line, stabilized approach in a row, in a tailwheel. And I didn't really fully comprehend the difference between a tailwheel plane and a tricycle gear plane, and how those two differed in terms of challenge and technicality. And so I'm really thankful that I got to start learning with a tailwheel plane, because it taught me a lot of skills I didn't really know that I needed later on. And so anyway, kind of fast forward, I'm giving you a very long answer to a very simple question.
I love it.
But I graduated from college, went to work for Boeing, and my 170 is a 1948 model, so it's a fabric wing.
Oh,
and
wow.
I was not going to leave that thing outside in Seattle over the winter. So I said, I'm not moving my plane over until I find a hangar, which if you're familiar with Seattle, good luck.
Yeah.
Unless you want to build a hangar for $500,000, right? I mean, that was kind of your options. You couldn't find a T hangar anywhere. So I would commute every weekend. Every weekend I didn't have a volleyball tournament, I would commute back to Spokane. It's about a 4.5 hour drive to fly my plane.
Oh, wow.
Just for a day. I missed it and loved it so much. And when I first met my instructor right before I got my license, I told him, I said, I want to take my dad to Oshkosh. That's my dream. He's been once, but I want to fly him there. And to spare you details, my dad has kind of gone through quite a few challenges with his diabetes. At the time, he was in a wheelchair. He lost a few toes, had foot surgery. He had some eye surgery issues. So he was had an eye patch, and he was in a wheelchair. And I told my instructor that, and he's this is January when I started. Or no, it was February. February was my first flight with this instructor, and Oshkosh was in July.
Wow.
And he's hold on, let's just get your license first. And I told him, I said, look, this is absolutely my goal, and I will do whatever it takes to make this happen safely, doing the right way. And to give my instructor, fair credit, just like anyone, he kind of wrote that off a little bit, and he admits that, to this day, he's I didn't believe you, because you didn't really understand what kind of work that was going to take. But I planned that trip. Every day I spent at least 15 minutes to a half hour planning something, calling someone, calling for all these different fuel stops, planning 4 different routes: a north route, a north central route, a south central route, and a south route, depending on weather and hotels, and what places had courtesy cars, what places had tie downs, what places had hangars in case there was hail, or I don't know. I've never flown across the country before. And so when I got my job at Boeing, I got my license in May, in early May, graduated the end of May, started at Boeing in June, and part of my onboarding package at Boeing was you can leave for 2 weeks to go to Oshkosh. So we had 2 other airplanes that were scheduled to go with us, and a couple weeks before the show they both canceled for various reasons. And this was all a surprise, by the way, for my dad. He didn't know it. And so at the point where all of our experienced wingmen canceled, I'm okay, I gotta tell him. I gotta just tell him that we're it and what I've been planning. And I laid it out. I said, Dad, here's my plan. Here are all my routes. I've planned this whole trip, down to the wire. yeah, I was a project manager at Boeing. Like that's like what I did. I was very, detail oriented and focused on every single step of the process. And I just said, we need to do this. I said, we're always going to regret it if we don't try.
Yeah.
I said, worst case, we get halfway there, we're in over our heads. We'll turn around and come back, and we can at least say we tried.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest challenge was just his health. I mean, he's literally in a wheelchair, blind in one eye. And that trip single-handedly forever changed my life, because it just ignited this fire inside of me to say, like, I'm not just going to be a $100 hamburger weekend pilot like I thought I was going to be, because that's all that I knew. I didn't really think about ever becoming a commercial pilot. And I just said, man, I can't imagine someone paying me. Like paying me money to go fly a plane somewhere. That is crazy. And it was after that trip, that successful trip, which was an amazing trip. I mean, you want to talk about how God just opened the door for us. We had tailwinds both directions.
No way.
We had very few, if any, weather issues. We had no mechanical issues. We got a parking spot that was right next to the showers and bathrooms for my dad, randomly, totally random. We didn't like get special priority, nothing, with a handicap sticker. He's like, we're not doing no handicap, nothing. And I wheeled my dad around hours and hours every day, and we got to see just some of the most amazing things. Slept in a tent, and it was the most epic father-son trip of all time.
That's awesome.
So thankful for that. So that's the story of how I fell in love with flying. And it's crazy thinking back on that. But I went back to Boeing, and and for any of my Boeing people that listen to this, I had the most amazing team. The people I worked with there, my manager, the work I was doing was super exciting. I got to travel, like all these things. Check. Was being paid well, benefits, retirement. I had nothing to complain about at all. I had a 5-minute commute to work with the apartment that I had. And I just felt in my heart that like God was pulling me to do something different, like really evidently. And that's a whole nother long story that I won't go into on this short time that we have. But long story short was, I told my boss, I said, I have to leave. I have to. I said, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life if I don't go chase this. And, the biggest lesson I learned is that money alone does not make you happy. And that's a false idol that a lot of people have growing up. And, I heard that all the time. Oh, money doesn't make you happy. But it's like, yeah, but you have it and I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a struggling college student and you have money. Like, it's so easy for you to say,
right,
if I only made this much, then I'd be happy. If I could just pay these bills and have this much left over for a vacation or this or that, then I'd be happy. And it's a lie. It's just not true. Like, I remember my first promotion at Boeing. The day I got my promotion, I was already thinking, okay, when's my next one? When's my next big bump? So that was a huge lesson for me. And I just remember just thinking to myself, like, I want my kids, I don't have kids yet, working on it, but I want my kids one day to look at their dad and say, my dad loves what he does. Not, oh, my dad makes a lot of money. Your kids don't care how much money you make. They don't care about any of the things that like the world cares about. They care about, are you home? Are you around? Do you love what you do? And what's your attitude when you get home? And like those three things right there, I'm like, that has to be my goal. And so I left Boeing, moved on from Boeing, and again, moved to another place down in San Diego. I started a flight school down there and lived in a friend's garage. Super generous, like let me live in their garage for totally free in Southern California, which is unheard of. I had a little AC unit. I had a mattress on some on some pallets.
So
Like,
just to
it was great.
just to make sure I'm not missing anything here.
Yeah.
Before you started flight school or had any promise of a future in aviation, you left your job at Boeing just cold.
I had to. Well, I just knew. I said, if I don't jump into this to where I don't have a backup plan or I don't have like a safety net, it's not going to happen. I'm going to just putz around with it and, I'll like fly after work, or I'll go to a local flight. It would have taken me years and years and years and years. And at the time, like when I left Boeing, my obvious goal was, I'm going to go fly the airlines. Like I'm going to go to a Legacy, or I'm going to go to FedEx, or I'm going to go to the 747 one day. Like that was it. And so my decision was, okay, if I leave now, I'll go into some debt, but I'll get done in a year instead of taking 3 or 4 years to get done. And now I'm taking away from my retirement age, max earning potential at the end of my, so it was kind of a mathematical decision. But I mean, for me, my personality always was, and still is, like when I find something I love, I just go all in. Like I'm not very good at diversifying my passion. Like when I'm passionate about something, I'm like, I'm putting everything I have into this thing to like run with it. And when I left Boeing, I said, okay, I have to leave so that I feel fear. And it was that fear that like drove me to make sure that I gave everything I had, to succeeding. And I went to this school called ATP. It's a very famous school. Pros and cons with every school. I will say with ATP, they did what they advertised. They got you your ratings, and they got you through your training. It's not a place I would go for specialized training by any means. So I'm not going to sit here and talk bad about a school that got me to where I am today. But I will say there were a lot of things missing that I'm so glad I had somewhat of a foundation with owning my own airplane, learning in a tailwheel aircraft, learning from my instructor, who was a missionary pilot and a backcountry pilot and all that. But I got to tell you, like, I entered into a 9-month program, which meant I was going to get my instrument, my commercial, single, my CFI, CFII, and multi-engine commercial in 9 months. And I finished it in 5.
Jesus.
And the reason was not because, I'm just this great, super talented pilot. It had nothing to do with that. It was like, I just felt like God laid out this path where everything was perfect. Like, I never had an issue with an airplane. I had an incredible instructor at the school, which there were some good ones and there were some not so good ones. I had a great one. I never had to wait for an examiner. I never had to wait for a written test. I never had a weather delay, ever. Not one single time in the whole 5 months. I never had to cancel a check ride for weather or any reason.
Wow.
And all of my friends that I was in school with did, not for any fault of their own, just like
stuff
happens, right? And part of the benefit I had was I lived about an hour and a half away from my school, which wasn't great. So what that did for me was I said, okay, well, for one, I'm not in any rush to get home because I'm going home to a hot garage, right? Number two, if I leave at 3, 4, 5 o'clock like everyone else, I'm just going to hit traffic. So I would show up really, really early before traffic, and I would leave really, really late after traffic. So my study time, like, it was almost like naturally forced. If I lived 5 minutes down the road, like by the beach, and had a great, comfy living situation, which my living situation was wonderful. I loved the people that I got to live with, but it wasn't something that, like a huge temptation of like, I want to go home to like hang out and like watch a movie with my buddies, and like, it just wasn't like that. That was a huge reason that got me through my training so quickly was I studied my butt off every day just because it was easy to do because of my situation. Whereas a lot of other guys were either sharing housing or living together, you know, they were going and having fun and playing volleyball or doing fun stuff, just like having more of a balanced schedule, and my schedule just wasn't very balanced. So I was really, really fortunate that I made it through that whole program quickly. So during that program, I'm like, all right, I gotta have a job when I get out of here because I got all this debt. I need to pay back on that debt. And I love the sunshine, John. I love the sunshine. I love the sunshine. I love beaches, and I love volleyball. Those are like some of my biggest passions right there. And Alaska was never on my radar. I had no desire, ever to come here. I didn't know anyone that flew here. All that I heard about Alaska was that it was where pilots meant to die. That's all I ever heard. I mean, that's what everyone told me. Everyone that I knew and respected said, don't go to Alaska. You're gonna get in an accident. It's gonna ruin your record, or you're gonna get hurt. It's terrible. Don't go up there. So what did I do? Okay. Well, I didn't even think about it. So I had an offer to go fly in Hawaii with this gentleman. Great company, been around several years, wonderful, wonderful airplanes. And I get a call from this guy one day, like a month before I'm supposed to go out there. And he's like, Chris, I'm really sorry. I don't have a job for you anymore. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, your airplane that you were gonna fly just got into an accident. And it is totally destroyed, like not even salvageable. And the insurance company is trying to not cover the accident. So now I'm entering into a lawsuit with them. I don't know what's gonna happen. It was bad. It was a bad situation. So I'm sitting here fresh out of school with no other connections because I've had this like job as like a shoe-in. Like I'm going to Hawaii. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna be living the dream. I was single at the time, you know, all these things. And I'm sitting there like, well, I gotta find a job. I applied to everything. Grand Canyon tours, like survey jobs. I even applied to fly around dead people for a funeral home. Like, and I got a lot of, you know, responses of like, yeah, you know, we can give you a right seater job, but we can't really pay you, but you get great experience. And for me, you know, it's not that I was, you know, stuck up or had a ego problem or anything. I just said, I can't do that. I have to make a certain amount just to pay my loans. You know, my loan period was coming up. And so I said, that's not going to happen. And I have this uncle, and he's someone that has taught me a lot about flying. He used to fly in Alaska. He flew in the southeastern region. And he's an uncle, not by blood, but by friendship with my dad. You know, kind of one of those little bit rough around the edges type of guys. He's been through a lot. He's seen a lot, and he's had a lot of his friends die. And it's kind of, yeah, I mean, it's impacted him in a very dramatic way, just like it would anybody. And I remember one day we had him over for dinner. I think it was actually Thanksgiving. Or no, you know what it was? It was Christmas. Yeah, we had him over around Christmas time, and he said, you need to go up and like just buy a ticket and go up to Alaska, go to Anchorage and just walk around Lake Hood and just go meet people and shake their hands and give them a resume. That's the only way you're gonna get a job. And I'm a millennial. I'm like, yeah, whatever, old guy, you know, I'm not doing that. So what did I do? I spent the next 2 weeks scouring for all these different companies. Like, and I'm pretty good at this stuff. Like, I was a salesman. Like, that is what I did. Like, I'm not just emailing people and waiting a week. Mm-hmm. Like, I had this whole spreadsheet of like, okay, here are all the companies. Here are their chief pilots. Here are their director of operations. Here's their directors of maintenance. This is the front desk receptionist name that I talked to on these days. I sent an email to this guy on this day. I've left a voicemail on this guy's desk on this day. This is when this guy goes to lunch. Like I went crazy with it. Like I was just boo, 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 boo. LinkedIn stalking everyone, like Facebook, doing everything I could to just feel like I could get an in with them. Like when I was talking to him on the phone, like, hey, I noticed that you guys are, you guys fly to these places, you fly these types of planes. I saw you just bought this plane last year. That's awesome. Trying to make them think that I knew something about them because, you can only learn so much by not being there.
Right.
I could not get hardly anybody to respond. Like it was really, really challenging to get a response out of any of these companies that I wanted jobs with. And I decided after about 2 weeks, I started to get desperate. And I said, you know what? Just like what I did with San Diego, I'm going. And I bought a one-way ticket up there. I said, I'm going. I got a rental car, I got a hostel reservation, and my plan was I'm going to bring up, some nice shirts, a tie or two, which was a huge mistake. Yeah. Bring a tie to Anchorage. And I'm going to go drive around, and I'm going to sit in these people's lobbies until I get to talk to somebody, and they'll tell me to my face. Because I'm tired of getting ignored. I was very frustrated. And the best thing I ever did, I don't even know how I thought of this or why, supercub.org, if you don't know what that is, it is the largest collection of backcountry bush STOL pilots. It's like a STOL pilot Facebook. It's called supercub.org, and you can make like a little profile, and there's all these forums and pages and questions, and people can ask about stuff, and it's basically just for a bunch of pilots to tell lies to each other and tell stories. Kind of like what I'm doing to you right now. And I just made a post on there, and I just said, hey everyone, my name's Chris Hartis, I'm from Spokane, Washington. And I just kind of told them like my story. I said, I have 507 hours, I've got all these ratings, I've owned my own airplane, I'm looking for a job in Alaska, I've applied to these companies, I gave them the whole list. I said, I've not gotten responses from any of them, and I'm coming up to Anchorage, and I'm going to hand out resumes, and I would love for any advice from anyone that's familiar with the area. I'm open to anything. I said, I know nothing. and I was just blown away by the responses. I mean, I got texts, emails, phone calls, like voicemails from all these random people within hours. I mean, it blew up. I mean, I think the post is still on there. You can go out there and like look it up, and there's like 100 comments. It's crazy.
Wow.
And just people were so kind, and there wasn't hardly anyone like, get lost, kid, which I was kind of expecting. Everyone was so helpful. They're like, thank you. Like, not enough people come up to Alaska. You're doing the right thing. Like, if you hang around the barbershop long enough, you're going to get a haircut. That is the best like analogy I can use, is like, that barber is not going to let you sit there with hair down to your elbows and not give you a haircut. You will get a haircut, but you have to be in there.
Yeah.
You have to be there. And so there was this one guy, and I'm going to give him a shout out. His name is Dennis Siri. And don't know anything about him, didn't have a profile picture. You don't really have profile pictures on there. I think you have like an airplane as your profile picture. And he said, hey, I talked to my wife. You're going to come and stay with me, get your money back for your rental car. I've got an extra truck you can drive, and I've got a Super Cub and a 180, and I'll show you around.
No way.
And this guy, I'm just like, man, this is crazy. Like, what guy would just offer up his home, his truck, fly me around? He doesn't even know me. There's no profile picture. He can't like look at me and see that I'm a regular-ish looking human being.
Yeah.
And I say, either this guy's like a sexual predator, or he's just the most amazing man in the world. And of course, he was the most amazing guy. He picked me up from the airport. He took me out to Gwenny's for my first ever Alaskan meal. Got the reindeer sausage omelet, which is what I'd recommend to anyone going to Gwenny's. And
hell yeah.
He, his niece at the time was the chief pilot of Raven, back when Raven was still operating, and he just introduced me to so many people. His son-in-law, or niece's husband, was very well connected with a couple of other air taxis, and they just connected me, just boom, 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 boom. He was really good friends with the chief pilot of FedEx, who I later lived with down the road, and like all these crazy things. And I'm like, I don't deserve any of this. Like, Denny's just walking me through the doors of some of these places. Like, he knows everyone and everyone knows him. And he's like, oh yeah, we're just gonna go talk to so-and-so, like the chief pilot. And I'm like, this is the lady I talked to that I got ignored by like 3 times. Like a couple weeks ago. And this guy just walked me right through the door. And so anyway, I'll kind of leave out names and companies just because I want to be respectful. But I got two different offers from 2 very nice, very reputable companies, and it was just incredible. But it was odd because they were 2 weeks on, two weeks off, per diem, guaranteed minimum pay, retirement, healthcare, like all the things. Everything. I had a girlfriend at the time. I could live in Spokane with my family, buy my airplane, all these different things. And for some reason, like when I got these offers, it just didn't feel like it was it. It just didn't feel like there was no joy in what I felt when I got these offers. And I was frustrated. I'm like, this is literally what I came here to do. This is what I wanted to do. Why am I not like content and like at peace with this offer? And so, well, I'm gonna just keep kind of searching around a little bit. And I drove by Lake Clark, who, funny enough, later on I found actually did email me back, which is crazy. I didn't even hardly see the email before I got to Anchorage, but they emailed me back. And I saw it in Anchorage, responded, and I went by and walked into this tiny, itty-bitty little freight office, which since has changed quite a bit, but, walked into this tiny building, you could probably fit 30 people in there, elbow to elbow, and there were about 40 people in there, elbow to elbow. People running back and forth, boxes going everywhere, like just people on the phone, like it was chaos. And I'm just looking at it like, well, what is going on in here? This is wild. And there's airplanes coming in and out of the ramp, and I'm just looking around and I just see airplane photos everywhere, and it just feels like what you think of when you think of a small family-owned Alaska company. And so I sat in the lobby and kind of waited for things to die down, and I went up and talked to the front desk, and I said, hi, my name's Chris. I got an email from so-and-so in your company, and I'm here to meet the owner, Glenn. She says, yeah, he's out back. And, this sweet old man comes out. He's in his mid-60s. He's, 5'4",
Yeah.
Glasses, white hair, white beard. And he says, hey, young man, so-and-so's, said you were coming in today. And, well, why don't you come have some moose stew? I just cooked up a fresh batch. And he invited me back in his office, and he fed me soup. And he sat down like what we're doing right now, and he said, well, tell me your story, and where you come from, and why are you here? And I just told him, I said, I just told him that pretty much everything I just told you. I said, well, how, like what version do you want? He said, well, there's a lot of moose stew back there. Tell me the whole thing. So I told him everything. And I told him, I said, I want to be the best pilot I can be. And I recognize that I don't know how to fly here. I said, I can fly my plane on nice paved, lit, straight, flat runways. I don't know how to land on a mountain peak. I don't know how to land in the water or on skis or on a dirt run. Like, I don't know any of that stuff. And I would really love to be taught. And I said, that's one thing that I will be boastful about, is that I am humble enough to admit that I don't know anything about this world, and I would really love to be taught. And if you give me a chance, I will do everything I can to make it good for you. And he said, well, I really don't need a pilot right now. He said, but my grandkids, a couple of my grandkids, and some of my I guess it'd be grandnephews, they're getting certain ratings done right now, and there's a little kind of flight school, something rather, out in the village where I live called Port Allsworth, and we need an instructor. And yeah, so I don't know how much they pay, but you know, there's no benefits or anything, but I'll give you a place to live, and it's really inexpensive, and you can have as much moose and salmon as you want. It's like, I've got plenty of it. And you know, when he first offered it to me, I was like, well, yeah, it doesn't exactly sound like what I had in mind. And I had no concept of what a village was. No concept at all. And he said, well, I tell you what, you know, I'm going out there tomorrow. Why don't you come back tomorrow and I'll fly you out there? And so that's a whole nother story in itself of getting to Port Ellsworth, but it was the craziest flight I'd ever been on in my life up to that point. I mean, we flew through things that I had never imagined was possible to fly through. Turbulence, icing, IFR the whole way. I mean, just crazy to me as someone very inexperienced and never seen anything like that. I mean, we had, you know, we were shedding, like we probably shed an inch of ice 2 or 3 times over the course of the trip, which to me was nuts. But, you know, in hindsight, it's totally safe, totally fine. Plane is rated for it, capable, and it's part of normal life now. Just did it today, right?
Yep.
And I remember landing in Port Ellsworth, getting out of the airplane, and it was blowing like 30. I mean, it was just miserable. It was and it was in the negatives. It was negative 10 degrees and blowing at the same time.
Nice.
Lake was froze, and I just remember looking out and just seeing snow machines running up and down the runway, people playing, like, and everyone in Port Ellsworth was just so kind. And just for people that don't know where Port Ellsworth is 200 miles off the road system. There's no roads to get there. You have to fly in a small plane to get there. It's on a glacier lake in the middle of Lake Clark National Park. And it's the most beautiful place I've ever lived in my life. And I just remember being there, meeting the Ellsworth family, the owner's family, and just meeting all the grandkids, meeting some of the students at the flight school, seeing some of the planes. I just remember thinking to myself, this is the piece I was waiting for. This was it. And my parents and my girlfriend are going to be so upset that this is what I am choosing. But I just felt like God really put it on my heart. He's like, this is where you need to be. This is where I need you to be. And I couldn't deny it. I said, okay, all right, here we are. And that is the job that I accepted over the other job offers. And I moved out to Port Ellsworth about 2 weeks later. And the best thing to ever happen to me and to Lake Clark, in my opinion, was COVID. When COVID happened, all these other large air taxis shut down because they could not afford to keep their doors open without having people in their seats. But Lake Clark was small enough and had very little debt to where they survived. And all these other villages that were supported by these larger airlines prior to COVID no longer had that ability, and they heard Lake Clark was capable of reaching their villages and getting in and out of weather. And so Lake Clark just did this. They just expanded. So I went from, you know, I mean, I even picked rocks off the runway for $15 an hour. Like, that was my job when I wasn't flying, is I would go out on the runway, and they were kind enough to let me do that a few hours a day in the morning before the flights left, and pick rocks off the runway. And they're like, yeah, just tell us how much you work and we'll just make sure, you know, you're getting paid enough to pay your bills. So I went from that to starting in the 207. And, you know, Lake Clark has been a huge part of my life, and I owe so much to that company and to the Ellsworth family for all the things that I've been taught, and the mistakes I've been able to make there, and the lessons I've been able to learn, thankfully, that have not led to any injuries, either of metal or of people, more just of pride in myself. Like, wow, that was not good. I mean, Lake Clark is such a unique company, and you know, I'm sure your listeners know that you also work there as well. Mm-hmm. And Lake Clark, there's no other company in the world like Lake Clark.
No.
They operate 17, at one point they had 17 types of aircraft that they were flying.
They're the highest risk operator on the planet.
Yeah, on the planet, because they operate single engine retrack, single engine skis, single engine off airport, single engine float, multi-engine. I guess they don't have multi-engine float, but they have multi-engine piston, multi-engine turbine, and they basically cover every single thing except for multi-engine seat.
Yeah.
There's no other company in the world that does that.
No.
And with all the different models and with all the different off surfaces that we land on, I mean, it was a pilot's dream getting to learn in that company, and the fact that I got to fly every single airplane that we have.
Oh, really?
I've gotten to fly, okay, that's technically not true, because there were certain airplanes that were bought after I left. So I never got to fly either of the Beavers. Since then I've flown quite a few Beavers, but I haven't gotten to fly either one of the Beavers, and I never got to fly the Black Hawk, the Stinson Norway. Those were the only three I hadn't gotten to fly, but oh my gosh, like that right there, when I started working for Lake Clark, is what absolutely changed me forever. And the beauty I got to see, like the amount of times, like as corny as it sounds, the amount of times that like I was in tears on the job, not because I'm stressed or sad, because I'm just so joyful, like seeing the service that Lake Clark offers to people and the good that they do for the state of Alaska, and seeing the beauty in which we get to do it. I mean, like yesterday, I just had a moment yesterday. I was flying into a place called Chignik Lake, landed there. The whole village came out to get their food, and I brought a whole bunch of stuff out there, and there's all these kids running around and dogs, and I look up and the sun is setting. It's 4:30, the sun's setting. There's purple and yellow and orange behind the mountains. It's dead calm, the snow white-capped mountains, and there's this huge bald eagle on this just perch, like on this little light post sitting right there, just looking down at us, like 15 feet above our heads. And I'm just looking around like, how do you describe like moments like that to someone? Like, how do you describe a place that like takes your breath away? And how do you describe something that like actually ingrains itself into your soul? Like, I feel like if I ever left Alaska for good, like I went and did other flying and just didn't come back here, like I would be a fraud to myself. I would be a fraud. And I just feel like God has given me a passion for the people of this state and for the kind of flying that is here, that is only here. It's the final frontier for pilots, to where I would be doing a disservice to the world if I didn't work as hard as I can to share that passion with people. And that thought and that idea is why I actually left Lake Clark. It has nothing to do with the fact that I wasn't happy. I was so happy doing what I was doing, making good money, doing all this crazy fun flying. Loved it. Loved the owners, loved my coworkers, everybody. But my dream was I wanted to go and start my own air taxi. And I got an opportunity to do something very close to that, not to start it from scratch, but to help someone who had already gone through a lot of hard work take it to the next level. And I feel like I have to tell this story, because the story is just ridiculous.
Please do.
It started with a backpack. So I'm going to call this guy out. His name is Aaron, and he's one of my really good friends that I still fly with here at Lake Clark from time to time when I come back and help out. And he is someone I was flying with in the Navajo at the time. I think he might have been training me, or I think I might have just been moving him, actually. Moving him to another place to pick up an airplane. And we're flying through this village, and we're dropping off a bunch of lodge guests. And they're lodge guests for a lodge called Iliamna River Lodge. Mm-hmm. And I get out of the airplane and I meet this man. He's this massive huge man, big bald head, orange beard. His name's Bill. You'll never forget Bill if you ever met him. He's like 6'6", just huge. Big personalities, big hands, and we just meet and talk, and I just like right away, like, you ever just like have a connection with someone and you're just like, man, I really like that guy. Mm-hmm. And unbeknownst to me, he had been hearing things about me in Port Allsworth. He had a lot of friends in Port Allsworth that had like been saying some positive things about me for whatever reason, and we're unloading everyone's stuff, and they're kind of in a rush because they got to drive their boat across the lake to the lodge up a river, and you know they've got dinner planned. And so I got to talk to him for like 5 minutes. It was super brief, and he left. So Aaron and I flew back to Port Allsworth. It was about a 10-minute flight or 15-minute flight, and I'm getting my bag, and I can't find my bag. I'm like, hey, is my bag up there? He's like, oh yeah, it's right here. And Aaron holds up this backpack. I'm like, that's not my bag. Is that your bag? He's like, no, I thought this was your bag. I'm like, that's not my bag. And so, unfortunately, that bag was the most important bag in the whole airplane because it had the entire group's tip in that bag. It had like $40,000 in the bag or something close to that. Like a lot of money. Jeez. Right? In cash. So the client is frantic. Bill, calls Glenn. He's like, hey, you guys left the bag. It's very important. And so I'm embarrassed. I'm like, oh my gosh, like totally my fault. Like I should have verified that all the bags got off. I didn't, right? And so Glenn called me. He's like, yeah, take the Stenson and go fly the bag back, which I was kind of low-key excited about because I really love that airplane. So I got in the Stenson, not the 108, but the 10 Alpha model. Flew back to Port Allsworth. Poor Bill had to drive all the way back across Lake Iliamna, drive all the way up to the airport. And I'm just like, oh man, I gotta make sure this guy knows how sorry I am. I apologize. And I give him the backpack. I'm like, Bill, I am so sorry. I know how much of an inconvenience this was. And he's like, Chris, don't worry about it. I'm actually really glad that this happened because I wanted to talk to you more. It's like, I don't care about the backpack. I just got to drive a boat with my son. He got to, practice his driving. His son, I think, was like 12 or 13 at the time. And he's like, Chris, what do you want to do in Alaska, like in the next couple of years? I'm like, I'd really like to run my own air taxi. He's like, do you want to fly a beaver on floats? I said, I would love to fly a beaver on floats, but I don't have any float experience. I've got like 30 hours, 30 hours on floats, which is nothing. No. Right? No. I got my rating and I've done like maybe 5 or 6 135 flights and the 206 and the 180 and that's it. So not much. And I'm no dummy. I know how insurance works and that does not compute. Right. So Bill, who's not a pilot, he said, well, he's like, don't worry about that. I really want to introduce you to my partner, Chad. And I said, okay, like who's Chad? He said, well, we have an air taxi. Chad runs the air taxi and he's got another lodge called Rainbow River Lodge. And we're just looking for a young guy that like loves people and is a great pilot and is just really, really passionate about Alaska and is in it for the long run. I'm like, well, I do fit that description, but I don't have any float experience, and I know how hard it is to fly a beaver in this area. And I had a high level idea of what they did. Like you can't just be a float pilot off the street and just show up and start flying in the interior. Usually you kind of need to start in Anchorage, do some like long haul flights to like some easy, simple places like Brooks or Twin Lakes, things that are just very straightforward. But like these guys are like landing on very tight, winding rivers, heavy current, all these different things that I've never experienced. I mean, they're even doing like, tidal stuff. And so it was pretty intimidating, but I said, I would love to fly a beaver. And he said, well, I want you to talk to my partner, Chad. So I called Chad and he's like, hey, Chris, yeah, Bill told me all about you. And hey, I'm sorry, Bill, I love him to death. He gets really excited. He doesn't quite understand kind of how the insurance procedures work with us hiring on a pilot. I know he really, really wants you to be a part of our team, but he told me what your experience is, and you just don't have anything close to that. But if you ever have, 500 hours on floats or like 100 hours in a beaver, like, please call me back. I'd love to talk again. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it's just a really hard kind of standard that we have to have, and blah, blah, blah. Right. I said, no, I totally understand. I was kind of surprised that he was so gung-ho and excited about it. And I thought it's kind of sounded too good to be true just with where I'm at. But I really appreciate your time. And so anyway, we hung up the phone. And I just remember hanging up the phone and sitting there and just saying to myself, man, I couldn't let go of it. It was kind of this weird feeling. And, I went on with Lake Clark flying several more months, and I just couldn't get Chad off my mind. It was the weirdest thing. Like, this guy I'd never even seen or met. I couldn't get him out of my head. And I just, I called him back and just said, hey, Chad, it's Chris. I know it's been a few months, but man, do you have any time to just meet face to face? I would love to meet you. Just shake your hand, just so you can actually, see me in person. That would be awesome. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. How about the last day of the season, which is like the end of September? So I take my best friend Ben in 172. He's working on his commercial, and we fly over to Iliamna. I said, I will instruct you for free if you fly me to Iliamna and you rent the plane, because he needed to rent the plane and have me instruct him and do some things anyway. So Ben and I flew into Iliamna. Chad flew into Iliamna in his Beaver, took a truck and drove up to the airport to drop off his clients and meet me. And it was pouring rain, miserable, like really, really rainy. Ben stayed in the airplane, and Chad and I spoke on the ramp for like 30 minutes, soaked. It was awesome. We didn't even talk about beavers. We didn't even talk about flying. We didn't talk about anything like what we talked about on the phone. Like, we just talked about our lives and like what we cared about, and like our passions and aspirations and what we want in life. And I just told him a little bit about my story, and I told him just about how, my faith is a big part of who I am, and just kind of told him that, I felt like I was put on this earth to love people, and also was given a passion to fly airplanes, and airplanes were just a tool to loving people. And we shook hands and walked away, and that was it. I was like, well, God, maybe I was just supposed to meet Chad because we just needed to have a good, uplifting conversation, and that was it. And I walked away totally at peace. I'm like, all right. So I walked away, this is October, late September. Well, Chad calls me in November. He says, hey, Chris, I would love to have you out to my place in Vernonia, Oregon. There's an airstrip right by my house. You have a 170, right? You told me about that. I said, oh, yeah, it's in Spokane. He's like, well, it's a short flight. You should fly it in there. Any excuse to fly. I said, absolutely. So I went home for Christmas to see my family, and I went down to see Chad. And I flew down to see him, stayed with his family for a couple days, and he just sat me down and was like, Chris, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how we're going to do this, but I just feel it in my bones, like we are supposed to work together. He said, let's get one thing straight. You do not have the experience that you need to step into a Beaver and fly it successfully in this company. You just don't. This isn't just a standard Beaver job. He said, this is I don't even know the way, the right way to put it, but there's your entry-level float job, there's your entry-level Beaver job, and then there's what we do. That's kind of how he explained it, just the technicality and the skill and the craftsmanship that is required to do this safely, to where I trust you with these high-paying clients that are, not going to name names, but some of the most famous people in the world coming to this lodge that are worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. I have to trust you, because one accident and you could put me out of business forever.
Yeah.
And so he just said, I don't know what we're going to do, but we need to figure out how to get you there. I said, okay, well, hey, let's start by calling the insurance company. And so I won't go into the weeds, but we called the insurance company, and Chad was trying to upsell me to the guy. Oh man, I got this great guy. His name's Chris Hartis, and he's got a couple thousand hours in Alaska at this point. He's got twin turbine time. He's got IFR single pilot time. He's flown in our area. He's very, very good. No accidents, no failed check rides, like blah, 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 blah. And the guy's like, Chad, hey, that's great. How much flow time does he have? And he's like, well, that's the only thing. That's the only thing we need to get past here is, well, he's only got 37 hours of float time. And I'm on the phone with Chad, we're on speakerphone, and I chimed in, and long story short, Lake Clark area used to train Army pilots. There's this squadron called FWATS, Fixed Wing Aviation Training Squadron. And FWATS sent float pilots to Lake Clark for them to train. And funny enough, the guy on the phone knew one of these people that I trained in FWATS. He was in the military. He was ex-military and was with one of these guys that I trained. I gave him names because I had their names in my logbook. And he's like, let me call you guys back. I'm just going to call this guy and see if he remembers Chris and if he can tell me anything about him. And so we're like, okay. And I said, well, it wasn't a bad experience for anyone. So I think my chances are pretty good. He's at least not going to give me a negative report, And so Chad and I, we shook hands, hugged, and said, hey, yeah, let's see what happens. And I left and came home for Christmas. Well, right after Christmas, the guy calls Chad back, and he's like, all right. And I probably shouldn't give these real numbers, but I'm going to give them. I guess I don't know why that would be a problem, but this is very odd for an insurance company to do. He said, Chris needs 100 hours in a float plane and 25 hours in the Beaver, and you're covered. And Chad is like, what? That's it? Are you kidding me? That's it. That's all he needs to be fully covered in the Beaver to fly people, like everything? He's like,
wow.
Yep. Like, I got a great review, and the guy that I talked to, he's like, I know him, and he's not exactly one for giving out compliments, and he gave Chris a good compliment. So we're going to trust that you're going to train him correctly, and that you guys are going to be safe and do this right. And so that was the day that Chad's like, Chris, come on, like, we have to do this together. And I just felt it. I'm like, I can't say no. I have to. Like, my dream had always been to fly a Beaver. It's my favorite airplane of all time. All time. And I told him, though, I said, Chad, a Beaver pilot job to me, like, that job alone is, stereotypically, it's a dead-end job. It's for guys that are retired, or it's for guys that, they are like kind of building some time, but they're eventually just going to go do something else. I said, I want to start my own company one day. I would love to run an air taxi one day. And he said, well, let's talk about that. He just said, Chris, I've been doing this a long time. I love what I do, but I really want to hand the reins to somebody else. And I'm not going to do that with someone I don't trust. And he said, the bottom line is, that's a marriage. And you and I haven't even gone on a date yet. So.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Bob, can you grab
Hey, little buddy.
Sam?
We almost had a guest appearance there.
Yeah.
Future pilot in the making.
Tower controller, I think.
That's right, the tower controller.
Yep.
But, yeah, Chad basically just said to me, you need to date someone before you marry him. And that's all I needed to hear. I said, all right, well, if you're willing to date me, like, I'm in. Because this is what I'd really, really love to do. And so I went to Glenn, and I just told him, I gave him a year's notice. I said, Glenn, I love working here. I love everything about it. I am so grateful for the opportunity that you gave me, which is why I'm giving you a year's notice that I need to go chase this dream that I have of flying a beaver and hopefully one day running an air taxi. And, you know, obviously there was disappointment, but he understood and was super gracious with me, and we still to this day have a great relationship. That's why I'm here in Anchorage right now. I'm flying for him right now. You know, I told him, I said, if you ever need me when I'm not flying in the summer during, you know, the beaver season, I will be there. So we still have a great relationship to this day. But that next year, I would go 1 day a week to the lodge in a float plane, which a really good friend of mine in Port Ellsworth very kindly allowed me to use to commute back and forth to this lodge. And I got to fly there 1 day a week with Chad. And he put me through the paces, like every day. Like, and I gotta be careful some of the stuff I'm saying. I mean, at the end of the day, he was always PIC and he was at the controls. He had a dual control airplane, but he would put me in the right seat and be like, all right, you're taking off with, you know, bodies in the back. You're taking off, you're doing this. I'm not gonna let you hurt this airplane, but I'm gonna make you sweat. And he made me sweat. And I mean, I'd get back at the end of the day just exhausted, like emotionally, mentally, just like, I felt like I was starting from scratch. I'm like, man, I got so comfortable in the King Air and the turbines and the Navajo and even like the bush wheel, like off airport stuff. But, you know, going from like the 206 going to Big Lake, or the 180 going from Big Lake to Big Lake with like an average to like not super heavy load, and then going into a beaver and like, all right, we're taking a heavy load into a small body of water with a current.
Yep.
In an airplane that's very heavy, that is a absolute kite in the wind. And I'm going to teach you how to fly this plane with the engine off, right, in the water. That was all new to me. I didn't know any of that stuff. And so he was very patient, and those 25 hours were some of the hardest hours I've ever had. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so following that year, started with Chad the next summer, and that was the beginning of something really special. And that kind of turned the next chapter of my story to now Rainbow River Lodge, which is what I do now, Rainbow River Lodge and Rainbow River Aviation. So I manage a lodge out in the middle of Southwest Alaska. We take people on epic fly fishing trips. We take 14 guests a week on this amazing luxury experience. Great premium cabins, 5-star food, hot tub, sauna, all the works. You know, 3 beavers and a 185. Fly the guests out every day, anywhere they want to go, anything they want to do. And after we drop the guests off during the day, the air taxi does work for other people as well. So we bring fuel, bring in supplies, and that's kind of where I come in. So every night, you know, after I sit down with my guests and hear about their day and talk about their fishing for the next day, I go up into my office and I am nonstop just working to build a schedule the following day. And the operation, you know, it's grown quite a bit. Like when I started, we had 4 beavers, a 185. Yeah, 4 beavers and a 185. And now we have 7 beavers, the 185, and 2 Helio Couriers.
Wow.
It's grown substantially. And we're building lodges. We just built a brand new lodge last year called Bear Haven. It'll be one of the biggest bear viewing lodges in the state of Alaska.
Oh, wow.
Just incredible. We've got a really incredible hunting program where we take people on self-guided hunts. We provide that big game transportation for them where we can basically, you know, rent them gear, and they tell us where they want to go hunt. We can go drop them off and let them hunt. When they're done, we pick them up, and we have a fish and float program where we send people out on a river with a guide, bunch of really nice food, nice equipment. They raft down the river, setting up camp, fly fishing, and we pick them up after a week. And
dude,
we just have all these incredible programs, and that is my job now as now a part owner with Chad, is to help kind of direct that schedule. And I am not the only one like doing this. Like we have several different guys. I've got an incredible team I work with. I've got a guy that is in charge of our training. His name's Forrest. He does all of our, kind of training manuals and helps with check rides. He and I are both, the check airmen for the company, but Forrest runs his own little division in one region, and then we have another guy named Stefan who runs a division in Dillingham, and just a lot of really exciting expansion on the horizon. But I think the key difference about our company with maybe a stereotypical Alaska company is every single person on our team, and I mean every single person on our pilot team, loves people. Every single one. And we don't just love flying, we love taking care of people. And that to me is what sets us apart. And our goal is to take care of people, but also be really, really, really good pilots. And when I moved here, there was kind of this mantra in Alaska of, well, if you're a really good bush pilot, you kind of have to be a little bit of a jerk and a little bit rough around the edges to let people know how good of a pilot you are. And it's like, why do professionalism and customer service, why do they have to be on opposite sides of the playing field here? Why can't they be intermixed?
Mm-hmm. Right?
Give your passengers a good briefing. Make sure that they feel comfortable and taken care of and loved when they're in your plane. They should love flying with you, not scared. There are a lot of pilots that yell at people and don't touch this, don't grab onto that, don't get in, and, sit down and shut up is kind of the approach. And that just is unacceptable with our company. We do not abide by that, and that's not the direction that we're moving in the future. So my biggest passion right now, next steps is all these young pilots that, grooming is usually used as a bad word, but to me it's a good word in the way that we're doing it. We are grooming some really incredible young men. No women yet. If there's any women out there that want to become float pilots, we're really excited about that too. But so far, we're a team of guys, and we've got some young guys that have been born and raised in Alaska, or have grown up, and have been fishing guides or dock hands or assistants to our mechanics or maintenance crews. And our program, the way that we build these float pilots, is we put them in a role where we can see their work ethic, where we can see their attitude. How are they going to respond when the weather sucks? It's cold, they're tired, they're hungry, maybe they're overworked that day. What's their attitude? What's their work ethic like? And when we see a guy or a gal that has this special passion and fire inside of them where they're just going above and beyond what's expected, we invest in that person. And we've done that with multiple people that are now flying beavers. I've got a guy this next year who I'm really excited about. His name is Dries. He's going to be flying a 185 full-time. The guy that was before him, his name is Danny. He was born and raised in Alaska. He was a dock hand on our float base, and we were really impressed by his work ethic and his drive to get his ratings and get experience. And he's now in a beaver. He was in a Helio his first year, and he's in a beaver full-time next year. There's another guy who just moved to Jacksonville who's living close to me, and he's getting his commercial rating, and I fully expect him to be, our next pilot up and coming. And so that's what I'm excited about, is we're building guys that have the right attitude, that fit within our culture of taking care of people. And that's what I want people to think. When they think of Rainbow River Aviation, I want them to think those guys are just amazing humans. Not pilots, but humans, right? And it's hard to find companies that are rooted in that value.
That does seem to be, sorry about
That's okay.
that does seem to be a really interesting dichotomy you were pointing out there, where Yeah, a lot of the older pilots and a lot of the people who want to appear like they know what they're doing, or even those that do know what they're doing, have a pretty poor attitude, and it's not necessary. I notice a huge difference when, like, you know, I've had some pretty rough days and been out there and just been like, hey, you know, we gotta go, you can pee when we get to town, and then, like, when I, like, take a second and, you know, hey, look, these people they're paying a bunch of money.
Yeah.
They're spending, 4 hours with me.
Yeah.
It might as well not suck for all of us.
Yeah.
Like, how about we have a good attitude, smile a little bit, look them in the eye, help out where...
Have some fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and just that little extra, like maybe it puts me behind schedule by 2 minutes at a stop or something like that. And you do have to stay on schedule. You do have things you got to do throughout the day, but taking a little bit of extra time and focusing on the passengers a little bit more, and recognizing that, hey, maybe this is their first time flying in a Ford Explorer. Maybe they've never been through a mountain pass at 500 feet doing 200 miles an hour, and this is absolutely terrifying for them. Maybe moderate turbulence is something that they've never felt. Just taking a little bit of extra time and focusing on the passenger, it doesn't take all that much.
It doesn't.
And it makes a really huge difference.
Yeah. Well, you can turn a bad experience into a great experience.
Yeah.
Because there's so many factors that you can't control, but what you can control is your attitude.
Yep.
And you can control how you respond to a situation, but you might not be able to, control the situation or the environment. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just talking to people, like, if you know it's going to be rough before you get in the plane, just say, hey guys, I do this a lot, where I try to, like, I might even, like, lie to them a little bit sometimes. I'll say, hey guys, today's going to be rough, but I want you to know that I'm really excited. I'm not nervous about any of this, and this airplane is very capable, and this is usually where I lie. And the bumps are actually good for the plane. It helps exercise all the joints and everything in the plane. And I just tell them, I said, this is good for everybody. So just know that, like, it's normal. It's like being in the ocean. You can't expect to go in the ocean and not hit some waves. I said, that's all we're doing. We're just 500 feet in the air, or however high we need to go.
Yeah.
Hopefully 500 feet, right? And,
always.
And and just like that little attention to detail will just kind of help calm people down a little bit. Yeah. Or just show them that you care. Like, they just want to feel like they're taken care of. Like, okay, well, that guy seems like he's actually genuinely not freaking out and not nervous. So I'm a little less nervous now. Yeah. Maybe not perfectly calm and content, but I'm confident that at least that guy is happy. And because if they see you stressed out and, like, scared, that is not good. Yeah. And I don't care if you're scared or not. Like, that is not good. And something that you never really are taught in your training is how much your passengers can actually affect you in the outcome of the flight a lot of times. I mean, just the distractions, the screaming, vomiting, like, all the things happening behind you do affect you. Yeah. And they are factors. And so the more that you can do to alleviate that, I mean, gosh, I could speak to so many mistakes I've made of just where you put people. Sometimes you have to put people places for CG purposes, but other times it's like, all right, that girl pukes, she's going in the back. this guy screams, he's going next to her. Yeah, right. I've
definitely put queasy-looking people further back so I didn't get it in my hair.
Yeah. Or even just people that, and you usually don't experience this very many places, but there's always exceptions where you get someone that gets on your plane and you're like, I'm not sure about that guy or that gal. Maybe I'm not going to put them next to the door.
Yep.
Or maybe I'm not going to put them in the co-pilot seat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The
Made that
co-pilot
mistake
seats.
many times.
Yep. Yeah, that's a sacred place.
Yeah. Well, John, I apologize. I feel like I have talked 98% of this time, but I appreciate you listening to my story, the long, extended version. But I just wanted to give you some time. Like, were there any questions that you wanted to ask me that you wanted me to touch on or talk about more?
Well, as somebody who's come up from the States to fly in Alaska, you mentioned, shedding ice, heavy ice and turbulence in your first real Alaskan flight. What are some other things that surprised you about the differences in flying?
So it's always an interesting conversation because, there's a lot of things that happen up here.
Yeah.
Things that you would never imagine happen regularly. The biggest difference between Alaska and the lower 48 is this, in my opinion. I don't even think it's the weather. There are certain parts of Alaska that, yes, are very, very treacherous, specifically like the Aleutian chain. The Aleutian chain, southeast in the winter, is very, very, very challenging in terms of visibility mostly. But the biggest difference is the difference between necessity and luxury. In the lower 48, well, hello there. in the lower 48, flying is a luxury.
Yeah.
It is. I can't think of one scenario where it is ever a necessity, ever, unless someone's dying. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. But up here, like, I've noticed there have been so many accidents to where people fly out of, in their mind, what is necessity. Like they live off the grid and their family is out there and they're going in town to shop for food and they're like, we're out of food, or we're out of diesel, or my family's back at the cabin with a generator running off of diesel and we're just about out of diesel. I gotta go. So there's all these extra external pressures that lead to people making poor decisions. Versus in the lower 48, like, there's just so many, like, fewer scenarios in which flying is so, like, high pressure. Like, oh, we gotta go, we gotta do this. Oh, we're in for this doctor's appointment, I scheduled it. We're not gonna be able to reschedule it for another week. We need to get in there. Oh, my son is playing in the state championship basketball tournament. Someone died because of that. They flew in when they weren't supposed to. They ran into ice fog and they crashed in a lake because they wanted to see this basketball tournament. And there's tons of other tragic stories of just very, very challenging situations. You know, the lack of radar coverage, the lack of instrument approaches, the lack of weather reporting capabilities. I mean, all these different things. Like, when we launch every day, there are so many things that we have no clue what we're getting into.
Oh, yeah.
You have a weather camera at some places if they're working. You have weather reporting at some places within a 50-mile radius of where you're going, within reason. But beyond that, like, you don't really know, and like this time of year, we're dealing with runways, like even runway conditions.
Yeah.
Who am I talking to? Do they have freight on the plane that I am bringing, or are they leaving on the plane with me?
Yep.
Is there a bias here that I'm not aware of?
You got to have a few different phone numbers in that building.
There's all these different things, and they're like, oh yeah, I drove my 1,000-pound four-wheeler across the gravel and it was great. I'm like, okay, great. How about a 11,500-pound King Air? Yep. Probably going to be different, right? So there's all these like little things, and so the biggest difference is that I would say our world up here, totally different. Like, the things that they tell you to do and allow you to do and things you're required to do up here compared to the lower 48 would just boggle people's minds if they saw it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I don't even know where to begin with it. I mean, there's such little radar coverage.
Yeah.
That the only way that it works is for them to ask you certain questions like, can you maintain your own terrain and obstruction clearance through 9,000 feet? And I'm like, okay.
Yep.
What does that actually mean? The answer is yes, I can absolutely do that. They didn't say, can you maintain VFR through 9,000 feet?
Nope.
They said, can you maintain your own terrain and obstruction clearance through 9,000 feet? And my answer is, yeah, I can do that. Okay, climb 9,000 feet. After 9,000 feet, you're cleared to this.
Yep.
Okay, and why? Well, there's no towers. There's no repeater towers. There's no ADS-B out there. Like, there's all these things you cannot have access to. We're in the lower 48. It's like, dude, there's an approach from every airport in Timbuktu. There's airways everywhere. There's people that can relay for you everywhere. I mean, we just don't have that. And so you have to be very creative flying in this environment. And flying in the lower 48 usually does not condone much creativity. You usually don't want to be creative because the systems that we have established are very good.
Right.
And they've been built well. Mm-hmm. And anything that deviates outside of that is not good. Mm-hmm. And you're going to cause problems for yourself or for somebody else. And so creativity in the IFR world, in the lower 48, I would say do not be creative. Do exactly what everything says to do. But in Alaska, like there's a lot of places that don't have approaches. So how do I get from Anchorage to this tiny village with this 2,000 foot runway on the ocean with no approach in the middle of the mountains? Well, I have to file to somewhere that does have an approach, mm-hmm. shoot it down to minimums or wherever I can break out, and then I need to cancel with hopefully an aircraft overhead at 20,000 feet to center, because center can't hear me all the way down there.
Yep.
And then I'm going to fly VFR at 500 feet and 2 miles all the way to my destination.
Yep.
And I'm going to have to do that and stop at 12 places. Mm-hmm. And that's a day in the life of a single pilot IFR driver in Southwest Alaska. That's how you do it safely and do it legally. And yeah, there's just the hardest thing for me going from lower 48 up to here was I'm a very type A personality. Mm-hmm. I like to plan things. Yeah. I like structure. I want absolutes. I love black and white. Okay, well, what if this happens? Then what do I do? Well, what about this? Then what do I do? I mean, that's my project manager mind mm-hmm. coming out, right? And here, like, I like knowing my route the night before and thinking through it. Like, okay, I'm going to go here first. I'm going to have this much fuel. I'm going to put this freight over here. You know, I'm going to file this. I'm going to file it the night before. You can't do that. You have to show up to work and be totally okay saying, I have no idea what my day is going to look like.
Yep.
And it's not because I'm lazy. It's not because I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. It's because I'm being absurdly flexible.
Yeah.
Because that is what the job requires. Because, you know, I don't want to go too much in the weeds with this with the passengers, but there are certain, you know, the clientele that we serve are not Alaska Airlines customers or Delta Airlines customers. They're not people that's like, they're 99% going to show up. No, they're like 70% going to show up.
Yep.
And they're only 80% going to show up in a condition in which they're fit to fly. And they're only 90% going to show up with things in their bags that are legal to fly, that we will find halfway through our loading process, in which we got to unload stuff, in which means we got to cancel an entire route, which means we change everything around, right? So you just never know until you're there. I've been halfway to places and they're like, oh, the weather's fogged in. Okay, we can't go there. We got to go here first. It's like, oh my gosh, well now I gotta land at this smaller runway. I have too much fuel because I was gonna go all the way over here, but now I have all this fuel, prepping for that. So now I've got to figure out if I can, you know, like you just got to make all these changes on the fly. And I think that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah.
So that's Lake Clark Air. You know, that's the kind of flying that we do there. What I love about the float flying, now the float flying, that's a whole nother world in and of itself. Now, there's different types of float flying in Alaska, because there's not a ton in the lower 48 commercially. Like there's some, like there's some in Minnesota, there's some in Michigan, there's some in Maine, there's some in Florida, there's some in California, there's some in Washington, and I don't know of a ton of other stuff. And maybe I'm just ignorant on that, and I don't know what I don't know, but in Alaska, it's like the Wild West. That is the best way I can describe the float flying here. It is the absolute Wild West. You're basically taking a plane around with all these huge bodies of water, like thousands of lakes everywhere, just boop, 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 and rivers, and you're just like, huh, what if there's fish in there? I'm gonna go try. You know, or we haven't been to this river this year. Let's go try and land in there. I wonder how deep it is. I mean, not that reckless, but that is the attitude. Like, you're always looking for new places to go and new things to do. And every year and even every day, your runway totally changes. If it rained the night before and it's blown out and, you know, trees and sticks and logs are coming down, you don't really know until you show up there. Or what if the salmon are digging? They're actually like making beds in a certain bottleneck of the river that you need to land in, and they just took your drafting ability from 4 feet to 2 feet. That happens too.
Oh wow.
Right? And there's just so many different factors that go into the kind of flying that we do at Rainbow River Aviation. I mean, in terms of like the tide, like we got to plan all of our fishing trips with tide to certain spots, because there are times when it's too low to leave, or it's even too high to get in certain places, you know, just like depending on like what's really going on. But you know, the hunting season is a big part of that, where these guys will come to us and say, hey, can you drop me off on this lake? And you know, you're looking at it on Google Maps and you know, 4 flight maps, and trying to figure out, okay, how tall is this hill, and is there a low spot I can come in, and how long, you know, and how deep is this pond? It doesn't look deep on this one. He's like, oh no, I've been there before. It's at least 4 or 5 feet. And I'm like, well, the difference between 4 and 5 and 2 and 3 is a beaver that's upside down or a beaver that's right side up.
Yeah.
Right. So it's learning how to read water, learning how to read the wind. Like, I feel like I had no clue how to read the wind without a windsock prior to becoming a full-time float pilot. Like, yeah, I could see smoke and I could see this, but like the things you learn flying floats, because you don't have windsocks.
Right.
It's amazing. All these like little itty bitty things. I mean, it's just a totally paralleled world. It's not better or worse or more challenging or less challenging than wheel flying. It's just like a parallel track of flying almost. But yeah, the type of float flying that we do in Alaska, you cannot do anywhere else in the lower 48. I know there's some good float flying in Canada. I have not done float flying in Canada, but it's just the final frontier. I think I said that already, but Alaska is the final frontier for pilots.
So one of the things that makes the float flying up here really, really unique is that most of the terrain in the States where you can float fly, most of the areas that have a bunch of little lakes are pretty flat. But here you have the silt from the mountains that's come off in a very mellow angle that goes all the way out to the sea, and then you have it speckled with tons of little lakes, and that's the fine particulation that's coming off of the mountains that's glaciated and then melted, and then the pools where the glaciers have melted that you're landing in. That's you've got the tundra and then the lakes there, so you not only have a bunch of lakes, but you have the mountains around them, which makes it really unique compared to like all of my float flying is in Florida. And it's like, well, that was a swamp, and so it's, you know, it's all flat.
It's all flat, yeah.
So there are a bunch of little lakes, but there's no one lake will have that's 40 minutes away will have the same wind because there's nothing in between to change the wind. It's all
Well, and something that surprised me is that how quickly the wind really changes. Because when I can't really say, I mean, very few times in my experience flying wheels at an airport have I ever experienced just like complete 180-degree wind change like that. And it's not like 30 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour. It's like 5 miles an hour to either dead calm or 10 miles an hour the opposite way. And that happens very, very frequently on the water. And so there will be times where, I mean, I've got to do a step turn to get off the lake, which for people that don't know what that is, it's where you like a boat, you start in the plow, when you first start going, and then as you speed up, the center of buoyancy moves backward on your float to what's called the step, and you're kind of driving around like a speedboat. You have better control that way. And I will be doing a step turn in a way that I'm using the wind to help me lift a wing. But the wind will change, and so I have to completely reload my airplane because, like, let's say I'm doing a step turn where I'm lifting my left float. Well, I put all the stuff that, I can't fit in the cabin in my right float so that my left side is lighter. So it's lighter in my cargo compartment, and it's lighter to help, just break that plane right with the wind. And there have been times where I had to reload the plane completely because the wind changed in the 20 minutes it took me to load the plane. And there have been other times that have been so frustrating, especially for passengers, because they didn't really fully understand. But with a Beaver, wind is everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Like, you cannot, I won't say cannot ever, but if you're taking off with a 5-knot tailwind in a Beaver, holy smokes, it better be for a good reason. It better be because you got a really strong downwind current, or you're climbing out over descending terrain or something, because Beaver loves the wind. Like no airplane I've ever seen. A King Air could care less about the wind. You can tail with a 30-knot tailwind with a full load on a average size runway, no problem. Beaver?
By average size, you mean 2,000 feet?
Yeah. Well,
3,500.
not 2,000 feet.
Yeah.
3,000. Like if I had 3,000 feet with a full load in a King Air and it was blowing 20 knots tailwind, no problem. No problem. Plane can do it just fine. Climbs great. Beaver, you wouldn't even get it on step.
Jeez.
On a full lake, like if you try to take off in a Beaver, and that's a whole nother conversation, how to fly the Beaver well, but flaps and wind.
Yeah.
Two biggest things that get people in trouble is they don't manage their wind right, or they forget to put their flaps down.
Oof.
Well, and their fuel. The fuel selector is a big one too, but so I don't know where I was going with that, but we were just talking about the differing conditions and like how you have to be so adaptable to like, okay, just because your buddy just took off, and that's happened to me too. Like I was kind of following Chad, who is my mentor, as I'm like learning how to fly this Beaver. Is like, well, Chad just took off that way. Like, yeah, that was 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
He got loaded first. He was warm. You were cold. You had to warm up and puddle around the lake. And it's frustrating for passengers when you're like, all right, guys, I'm sorry, but we have to slow taxi 8 minutes across this lake to go to the other end because the wind changed. And they're like, but that guy just took off this way. It's like, I know, but the wind is different now. And I've made that mistake many times where I tried to do the same thing that Chad did when the wind changed and didn't work. So that's another key point, is you need to understand how to feel your airplane and know like something is not right.
Yeah.
Don't force it. Like if it doesn't feel right, it's because it's not.
Yeah.
And don't deny it. Just say, okay, like you can't have any pride about trying or sorry, you can't have any pride about going around or trying again. Like having the humility to board a takeoff with a plane full of passengers, regardless of how it looks.
Yeah.
To say like, hey guys, this wasn't gonna work. I gotta change something. Either you all have to go and take a pee and get in and we'll try it again, or I took off the wrong way, or the wind changed or something. But yeah. And then I would say the other thing, and this is the big one that no one really thinks about. I didn't think about this. We talk about flying a lot. What about when you're not flying? That, as soon as that prop stops turning, that to me is the most stressful part of what I do with a beaver. When that prop stops turning, it is a whole nother game of protecting the plane, taking care of your aircraft as you're parking. We're not parking dock to dock. We don't use any docks. The only dock we have is at the lodge. And it's a ramp with a little dock. We don't tie it to the dock. It's just there for people to step on. You are parking on rocks, beaches, gravel bars, all these different things that are not good for your float. So it's how do you take care of your floats? And this is, oh man, I could talk a long time about this. One of my biggest pet peeves. And I see it all the time. And I know these guys don't care about their floats, or they don't pay for their float patches or anything. They just, when they come into park. And they're not like ramming it on shore, like, beaching it, but they're coming in and just, but think about doing that to a $60,000 pair of Ito floats 100 times or 1,000 times.
Yeah.
It destroys them. Mm-hmm. I mean, a new pair of air sets, we just bought one this year, $150,000. For a pair of floats.
That's wild.
We are religious about taking care of our floats. Like we never, ever, for any reason, crunch an airplane into anything. You pick it up on the tail and you set it gently on rocks. And even then, like, people walk down your float and the float goes, yeah. And if it's sitting on a sharp rock, right?
Oh.
And that's happened to a couple of our guys. They're like, I swear, like I didn't hit anything. And I'm like, well, how did this big dent get in here? And sure enough, it was just like this really terrible, like it was on a part of the float where I'm like, even if they hit something, it couldn't possibly hit this part of the float. It was sitting on a rock and got crunched, as someone was stepping. But learning how to control the airplane after the engine is off is one of the biggest learning curves I had, and that I see all of our guys have. And it's something that takes years to perfect. Like I am still working so hard to perfect my control in the water. I had a lot of close calls. I mean, current, especially just rapid wind changes and gusts, and just knowing like, okay, how do I sail this plane, and like, what is my pivot point, and how do I anticipate what is the wind going to do when I turn this plane off, and how do I manage my speed in the water as I'm coming into park? How heavy am I? How much momentum do I have? Because if I'm fully loaded and I'm going 2 miles an hour, it's going to take 10 times the amount of wind to stop me as it would if I'm doing 2 miles an hour with just me.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's all these things that, like, in the lower 48, I mean, you've got dock boys, and you just pull up to a dock and they catch you and they tie you down, and it's just pretty standard and simple, right? But when you're in the field, you only have helpers with you and guides half the time. The other half the time, you're empty. You don't have people. So, yeah, I would say that's been the biggest thing that keeps me up at night that I think about a lot is just, okay, I'm going here tomorrow. This is the forecasted wind. Where am I going to park? How am I going to do this? How am I going to handle like the rough water scenarios? And because if you have waves crashing on a beach, you can't park your plane there. Just constantly hurting your equipment. Beavers are very expensive to fly, and they're getting worse and worse and worse every year.
Yep.
And more get wrecked every year. There's less parts, there's less people refurbishing engines, there's longer lead times on parts, insurance premiums are going up. Like, so my goal is to not let the beaver die before I die. That is my personal goal.
Really?
My personal goal, and it's going to be on record now, is to be the largest beaver operator in the world.
Really?
We're at 7 now, and we're not that far away from being the largest.
Who's the largest, or what's the largest right now?
So right now, Alaska Seaplanes, I believe, has more than we do. So there's Alaska Seaplanes, Kenmore, And then there might be one in Canada that's still bigger than us in terms of, and you know, it's not like a stick comparison size. It would just be fun to be able to say that, you know, we're really contributing, helping keep that line of aircraft alive. It's such a special plane, and it's a piece of history that is slowly dying, just naturally. You know, they don't build them anymore. There's a finite amount of them, and it's inevitable. Eventually, one day, it won't be economical for us to fly them.
No.
The problem is that there is no replacement for that plane.
Oh.
And people ask me, like, well, how can you say there's no replacement? Like, what if you just bought an Otter? And I said, okay, great. Well, let's think about that. An Otter is going to draft at least 1.5 feet, if not 2 feet more than a Beaver. Number one, on the floats. So that eliminates 3 or 4 rivers that we go to. An Otter I can't control by myself in any kind of wind more than 5 to 10 knots in the water. Meaning when that engine's off, if it's blowing 15, 20 knots, one guy cannot control that plane in the water. Me, I can control my Beaver in that kind of water or in that kind of wind. As a 230 pound, 6'5" person, I can do that. Mm-hmm. And even if I wasn't that big, there are good ways you can maneuver your plane and control yourself, but the Otter's just too big. The Otter also is not economical to fly unless it's full. If it's not full, you're not making money, you're losing money. So the Otter's out. Okay, well then you go to the Cessnas. Well, there's no good Cessna that can carry 6 people, 2 rafts, frames, oars, lunches, backpacks, and a pilot.
No.
Well, then you go to the Kodiak. The Kodiak was kind of the one that I thought, maybe this will work. You can't fit hardly anything in there with it on floats. And it is not anywhere close to the performance of a Beaver, even with the turbine on amphib floats.
Huh.
So because of those reasons, the Beaver stands alone.
Wow.
And there's a reason you don't see Kodiaks. And there's a reason that there are people that operate Otters, but they're going to big lakes. They're going to big lakes that are deep enough, and they're carrying 9 people.
Yeah.
And that makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, there's nothing that can replace it. So I really would love for my kids one day to be able to get to experience the joys I've had flying those planes. And it takes you back in time. You know, they were built in the Korean War era. Mine served overseas, flew several missions, was retired, had bullet holes in it when it was in the museum down in Seattle. And we've got several planes that were like, have even cooler stories than that. Like a lot of mystery and like non-named government agencies were using them for like spy work and had all these really interesting parts on them that no one really knew like what they were. And yeah, really interesting.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Do you have a call sign?
Do I have a call sign?
Yeah.
For my Beaver?
No, for you. Like, did you ever pick one up?
Well, people. It's kind of corny, but people at Rainbow River Lodge, they call me Tango Papa because that's my Beaver. It's a 338 Tango Papa.
The bright orange one?
The bright orange, yeah. It's orange, brown, and white.
I always see that and smile when I'm flying overhead.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Man, I love that plane. It is so that plane, I will brag on that plane. It has nothing to do with the pilot. Pilot has made a ton of mistakes. And she's been really, really good to me. But that plane had the least expensive annual out of any in our fleet and any in our entire, the person that does our maintenance, I'll leave him anonymous. But he does a lot of Beavers. Mm-hmm. Very well known. Like tons and tons of Beavers. The least expensive annual out of any plane.
No way.
And it's not because he skipped a bunch of stuff. It just was like, it's just a beautiful, perfect plane. And same thing this year. I brought it back to him, and I'm like, I don't have a squawk list for you. I mean, it's just a great plane, and so it flies itself better than I can. Like better than me. Like my job is just to like let it do its thing and not do something silly.
Yeah.
Like my goal for for myself and for Chad. Well, this is his goal for himself and my goal for myself that I model after him is I want to be able to fly in Alaska for 40 years with no pilot error accidents.
Nice.
Meaning if I have an accident, it better be because it was from something I could not have prevented or something that I did everything I could to stop, and like an engine fire or just something absurd that is not the pilot's fault. Like that is my goal. And the only way that I'm going to get there is by being consistent, maintaining a high standard for myself of what I will and won't do, and remembering that I've got a beautiful wife at home. I've got her picture right next to my altimeter.
Yeah.
Which is usually the thing you're looking at when you're about to do something bad. Right? I put it there very purposefully. And I think those are the big things. Making good decisions, not being in a rush. That's usually where people mess up, is emotionally they get compromised for some reason. They get in a rush, they're angry, or they're tired, or they're just want to just need to go.
Yeah.
And that's when it happens.
Get a little irritated, and
it's usually not when you're like touching all the things and you're doing your flow and you're checking your stuff and you're it's just rare.
You know, I found the perfect picture to put in my plane. 316 John 316, you know, John 316.
I like that.
That's what I flew. And I got it printed out and I taped it up, and the first day I taped it in there, I had the unluckiest day of flying that I've had. And I took it,
talking about that.
I took it out and I was like, babe, I'm sorry, but I will never tape your picture in my airplane again. It's not going to happen. She was like, I understand. That's a good excuse.
Maybe she kept you alive.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe she's right there with me.
I'm sure your listeners have heard that story.
No, not yet.
They haven't?
No. Maybe someday when when everything's closed. Chris, your wife is working on a YouTube project. Where can listeners find more about that?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking about that. So my wife and I live a really unique lifestyle, and where we live at this remote lodge together with 18 of our team members, and I run the air taxi alongside of that, but that's where we live together throughout the year, and that's where we intend to raise our family. And then in our off season, we do a ton of traveling, different countries. We have a lot of connections with different lodges. We're kind of, we send them clients, they send us clients, and we kind of host trips and go all over the world. Like we go to Belize, and we live in Florida in the off season, in Jacksonville Beach specifically. So Brianna has made a page where, people that just ask, like, what are you guys doing again? Like in Alaska? And wait, so you're living in Florida? And she's just kind of been documenting a little bit about what we actually do and what is life like living at a lodge and running an air taxi and living a seasonal lifestyle. And so we are still finalizing a name, but I think we've finalized that the name of the channel is going to be called Home is Where the Heart Is.
Dude, I love it.
Yeah, home is where the heart is, because it's wherever we are, that's home. And right now, I want to say that her YouTube channel is just her name, Brianna Hartis, but she is like literally days away from changing that. So I will make sure that she changes it.
I'll put the link in.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, and it's we're not trying to get famous or anything like that, but we just have people that have always asked us, like, we love your guys' videos. You should make it organized and post it so we can go and easily find them and show our family and friends and things like that. But I think people would be really, really shocked to see what it's actually like out there. It's incredible.
It's wild, and never I take pictures for Aubrey just about every day that I fly, and I get home and I'm showing them to her, and it's not the same. But
it's not the same.
But it is really cool to be able to try to show people little glimpses.
Yeah. And just to show people, like, what does it take to operate a lodge? That there's no roads to get to it.
No.
Everything either has to be flown in a beaver or boated in on a jet boat from a barge.
Yep.
That comes in twice a year or twice a summer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Be awesome. I'm sure people.
Yeah, no, I would love for you guys to check it out and subscribe if you'd like to see more of our stuff. We'll be posting quite a bit more in the future. I think she's got maybe 10 videos or so on there so far.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, John, I just appreciate you having me, and thank you for listening to my story. And and this is something I'd like to say to your listeners, if anyone's listening to this, because I'm sure people will one day. But man, if you're someone that is just, maybe you're a pilot, maybe you're not, maybe you're not really sure about where you want to go. Like, I just hope that people can be encouraged to say that, as corny as it may sound, like just ask yourself, will I regret chasing this dream or this passion on my deathbed?
Yeah.
Like, there was a study, like, this is super short, like, there was a study done where they interviewed 1,000 people on their deathbed, like, given days or weeks to live, and they asked them, like, what their biggest regret was. And every single person's regret, every single one, all 1,000, said that they regretted something that they didn't do.
Wow.
Not what they did. And so I guess my plea for people is just, man, if you have a passion about something, go chase it. Because the world needs it more than you might realize.
People who are passionate about what they're going after.
Yeah. Yep. So
I think we're really blessed in aviation to be able to see a higher percentage of that than in many.
Yes. Yeah.
Many pursuits.
And you would never guess where your passion might take you. Like, if you told me 5 years ago that I'd be like married to Alaska, never want to leave, and be flying a beaver on floats in the summer and king airs in the winter, and I'd be like, you're nuts. Like, my original plan was 1,500 hours, I'm out of here as soon as I'm gone. And 6,500 hours later, like, I just feel like I'm just getting started.
That's awesome.
And I hope that God blesses me with more time to be here, and I hold it loosely. Like, it could be gone at any moment, but yeah, I'm still here, so I'm gonna keep flying. So,
Chris,
thanks, John.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.